It's always a pleasure each year to talk to some fellow film critics about their best films and worst films of the year, and in this case, 2024. And it's my great pleasure to be speaking to Jake Wilson, who is the film critic for The Age and the Sydney Morning Herald. Jake, welcome as always to Movie Metropolis.
Thanks, Peter. It's nice to be here again.
Yeah, it's good to talk to you. All right, now it's been quite a year for such a varied selection of films. Let's start with your worst films of the year.
Okay, well, before I go into the worst films of the year, I want to say right off the bat that maybe even more than other years, this is a kind of work in progress list. I mean, no list is ever definitive, and obviously there are a million films I never see. But if I publish a list, which I may or may not, it may be quite different from whatever I might say to you, because there's quite a lot of
Sure.
big films I feel I should see that I haven't seen. I haven't seen Megalopolis, haven't seen The Zone of Interest going back to early in the year, many others.
Yeah, that's
But
fine.
I've seen plenty I can talk about, and
Sure.
hopefully I won't see too many candidates from here on in that would be candidates for the worst films of the year. Anyway, so I'll give
Okay.
you my worst films of the year.
Sure.
Um, going sort of down towards the worst, the fifth worst I thought was one I just saw very recently, Craven the Hunter, J.C. Chandor's Craven the Hunter, which starring Aaron Taylor Johnson as a lesser known Marvel superhero. These are or Marvel villains, sorry. These are these Sony movies that are kind of spin-offs of the Marvel universe or spin-offs of the Spider-Man films, which are really scraping the bottom of the barrel in terms of what they can exploit in terms of superhero IP, I guess they call it. But it's very disjointed, and it makes you wonder what happened with J.C. Chandor, who's he made some better films than this. All is Lost with Robert
Right.
Redford, among others, and I don't know what they were thinking when they hired him or what he was hoping for aside from the money, but it is clear that nobody got what they wanted unless he got money, which I hope he kind of hope he did. So that's five. All the rest, I'm sorry to say, are Australian. Disclaimer on that is that it's just the films that I see that are the worst tend to be the films that don't travel. So I don't see the equivalent of these films from France or the US or wherever.
Right.
So they are all Australian and they're all bad. The fourth worst I had was Runt, the children's film. I actually went to see this on Father's Day. I'm not a father. I went to a half-empty cinema, but it was meant to be fathers taking their kids, especially their daughters, to see this film. I didn't get the sense it was rapturously received, but I know it's not terrible for what it is, but it's also very bad. I mean, it's just very, very kind of broad and crudely written, didactic. Not a lot of effort or thought ultimately has gone into it. And I feel that kids deserve a little more. So that's why I put it on the list. So probably worst films in terms of sort of basic competence. These other three are more kind of lacking in basic competence. There's a film called Before Dawn. I won't dwell on any of these. A film called Before Dawn, which is supposed to be set in World War One and on the Western Front, I think, and is shot in Western Australia, and it's quite visibly shot in Western Australia. And it's just kind of too ambitious a project for this particular team to take on. There's a film called The Nut Farm, which is a comedy of sorts, starring the comic Arj Barker, who's not Australian, but we do see a lot of him here. I think, again, making a feature-length comedy was too ambitious a project for this particular team to take on. It doesn't work on any level.
No.
And finally, a film called Take My Hand, starring Radha Mitchell, made by a guy called John Rocktopoulos, apparently based on the life of him and his wife. Did you see this one, Peter?
I did.
Yeah, I
Sentimental.
don't really know. I don't really know what to say about it.
Yeah.
It's what they sometimes refer to as a vanity project. I think it's made by somebody who's not really a professional filmmaker, but has some money to make a film, and this is how it turned out. And yeah, that's probably about all I should say really about that.
Yeah.
So those would be my worst films of the year.
Okay. Good.
Um, Before we go, I do have kind of a ranked list. Before I go to that, just to make up for having sort of bagged all these Australian films, because I don't have any Australian films on my sort of list proper. I will say that my favourite Australian film, which played at the Melbourne Film Festival, it is a film called Us in the Night, which was made by a friend of mine, Audrey Lamb, and I think I'm thanked in the credits, not for doing very much, but I feel that when you're thanked in the credits, then perhaps you're a little closer to the film to be able to rank it objectively. But that said, it is definitely my favourite Australian film this year.
Okay.
Okay, so I'll go through. I do have 20, and I'll try and get through them fairly briskly. At number 20, a film I just saw the other day, A Real Pain, Jesse Eisenberg's film, which he wrote and directed and starred in with Kieran Culkin. And he and Kieran Culkin have a sort of double act where Jesse Eisenberg is uptight and Kieran Culkin is all over the place. And that's entertaining in itself. And then there's this other side to it, which is that they're going on a road trip of sorts, but the road trip is to Poland to sites related to the Holocaust. So it's kind of a whiplash kind of film tonally, because it's on the one hand a sort of a comedy and on the other hand dealing with something which is very much very much not suited to comedy, and certainly which the characters are taking very seriously. So it's a tricky thing to take on, but that's what's interesting about it, basically, to me. Number 19. This is a film that I think very few people liked, and certainly did not last long in cinemas. I've restricted this list to films that it was possible to see at some point in a cinema in Melbourne, whether at the festival or on general release.
Yep.
This was on general release. It's Robert Zemeckis' film Here, which reunites him with the people he worked with in Forrest Gump, Tom Hanks and Robert Wright Penn. And it's an adaptation of a graphic novel, which is kind of what's interesting about it. It's because the graphic novel jumps back and forth in time and is all set in one room. And Robert Zemeckis has tried to do his own version of this on film. And the whole film basically is set in one room with a fixed camera. And then there's all this kind of digital trickery that goes on to shift us back and forth in time. It's the kind of thing in a way which Robert Zemeckis loves to do, to play games with, what he can accomplish with technology. The script is not in all ways so strong, but it is a rare example of what I would call, in a way, an experimental film coming out of Hollywood. There are really not a lot of those. It's trying to do something with form in a way that almost no mainstream narrative films ever try. Whether it works or not is another question. I thought it was interesting. Number 18, film more people did see. I think I've had quite a few conversations about this film. The Substance, Coralie Fajar's horror film. You could say body horror. I mean, it's really, to me, it's more of a satire probably than a horror film. Ultimately, it's a satire of the beauty industry. It's Demi Moore kind of exploiting the fact that she was a star several decades ago and is back in the public eye in some way, and is playing a character who wants to stay in the public eye and will do anything to do so. And then it becomes very grotesque and gruesome. What it's saying is, to me, quite ambiguous, but what I like about it is the cartoonish quality of it, really, and the very it's very confrontational, it's very ramped up, it's very unapologetic about being those things.
Yeah.
And also Margaret Qualley, I really like, as kind of, not to give too much away, the alter ego of Demi Moore's character. Uh, number 16, I think. Yeah, yeah.
17? Yeah.
Okay, 17. Okay, a very, very strange film. Still don't know what to make of it. Haven't seen anything else by the director. Film called Christmas Eve in Miller's Point.
Ah,
Um, did you see it?
yes.
I found it totally mystifying, which to me is kind of a reason to put it on the list. It's like it's a very sincere kind of, almost a family Christmas film, but it's also not that at all, right?
Yeah,
It's
it's three
something,
generations, isn't it? Yeah.
yeah, but you're not told who any of the people are,
No.
and you're kind of invited to get completely lost, right? You
Yep.
just don't know what's going on.
Yep.
And I mean, in one way, it's a little bit like, say, a Robert Altman film used to be, say, in the 70s, where he would have a big ensemble cast, but the sensibility is really not at all like
Yeah.
a Robert
Yeah.
Altman film.
Yep.
And I have no real idea what this director is trying to achieve. He also seems to have some connection with avant-garde film. There's somebody pointed out that he uses several of the same songs that are used by Kenneth Anger, the great experimental filmmaker, in his film
Ah,
Scorpio Rising, which kind of puts another slant on a whole lot of things. I
yeah.
do mean to look further into this, but it's rare that I look at a film and go, I just don't know what that was. And in some ways, I always look at a film and go, I don't know what that was. But this one, on a more kind of immediate, visceral kind of way. Uh, Next one is another horror film. This was kind of an interesting year, I thought, for horror. I mean, I
Hmm.
feel like horror is almost the only genre still going. I mean, we have superhero films and we have horror, but most of the other genres, like big, popular entertainment genres, like thrillers and romantic comedies, don't exist anymore on the big screen, really,
Hmm.
at least in this language. They've kind of just gone to Netflix or whatever. But we have horror films and we have superhero films and horror films where people get to maybe experiment a bit more in a popular entertainment format.
Yep.
One that's several I could have picked in a way, but one that is certainly very effective and very curious is Longlegs, Oz Perkins' Longlegs, which in a way is a sort of riff on not just horror films, but also 90s serial killer films, things like The Silence of the Lambs. It also has something to do with David Lynch and so on. In a way, it's a synthesis of like just a lot of movies that Oz Perkins has seen, also, Stanley Kubrick's films and various other things. But it is very precisely made in terms of like how he uses sound, know exactly how weird he wants the performances to be. Of course, the weirdest performance is Nicolas Cage as Longlegs, which, if you haven't seen the trailer, or for those who might not have, I won't say too much more about.
Hmm.
But to me, it's not so much a scary film as an unsettling film. And even the unsettling part of it is more while you're watching it than afterwards. But while you're watching it, it's pretty unsettling.
Yes.
Uh, yes, I mean, I think most people would have to agree with that.
Yeah.
Um, Speaking of romantic comedy, as I said, there are not a lot of uh, Hollywood romantic comedies anymore. This film isn't really a romantic comedy exactly in the classic sense, but it is what you call a chick flick. Like, it's a French film, but it's very much in a popular entertainment sort of mode. It's a film called Iris and the Men. I think it has another title as well, and has perhaps gone by a couple of different titles, like a lot of French films do. But it's by Caroline Vigneault, and her star is Laurie Calamy, who she's worked with before, who's a real kind of comic star, who's sort of great at kind of getting these roles where she gets into embarrassing situations and reacts accordingly and has to kind of scramble her way out and so forth. And this is a film about a woman who's basically having a series of extramarital one night stands, and she's exploring like what's out there because she's kind of sick of what there's not a lot of excitement left in her marriage. And that's a subject that could be treated a lot of different ways, but here it's treated very lightly, and it's almost like a musical, and at one or two moments it does become a musical, and perhaps in her dreams, they currently might have wanted to make a full-fledged musical, but it's very enjoyable
Okay.
and it has a good ending. I keep wondering how it's just going to wrap up, but it wraps up well, I think. Um, Another film I just saw very recently. It's not out yet, like a real pain. It's going to be out on Boxing Day, and it's being talked up, not without reason. It won the Palme d'Or at Cannes, and it's being talked up as a contender, I guess, for the Oscars and so on. And that's Anora, Sean Baker's film,
Yep.
which, yeah, I'm sure if people have not heard of it yet, they will hear of it soon. And it's a film that goes through a series of stages. So it starts off as one kind of film, and then it kind of morphs, and then to a degree it morphs again. It's a ride you go on. It's like Sean Baker's other films in some ways, in that it has something to do with sex work. In this case, the main character is basically working in a strip club, and then she meets a guy, and that's when it all kicks off, and it becomes a sort of helter-skelter kind of ride from there. I won't sort of say too much more. I do think Sean Baker is quite a crafty filmmaker,
Yeah.
in that it seems like everything's getting a bit out of control, but he's thinking always in terms of structure, like how he wants these different pieces of the story to come together. So you don't really know what kind of film it is up till right to the end.
Hmm.
It's very funny also. It's maybe
It is.
it's funny film of those I've seen.
Yep.
And it has several terrific performances in it. And different people kind of take their center stage at different moments.
Hmm.
Uh, so going still in the the bottom 20, but I'll keep moving. La Bête, Bertrand Bonello's La Bête, very ambitious film. This one, there are a lot of French films on this list, but there often are. I don't see anything wrong with that. It's still one of the great filmmaking nations, France. So Bertrand Bonello is a guy who is willing to try anything, and in this film he tries a wide variety of things, but they're all held together by the presence of Léa Seydoux, who is his star. And I did get to interview him, and he did basically say that the film is a tribute to Léa Seydoux and her kind of aura. It moves around in time, this film, not just it's out of sequence, but there's a section set in the 19th century, one set roughly in the present, and one in the future. And, it shifts around in terms of different genres. And it is supposedly based on Henry James's short story novella, The Beast in the Jungle. It is a very, very, very loose adaptation, but you can see what the connection is. So it's a film I think that probably rewards looking at more than once, and it is certainly takes a whole lot of chances.
Yep.
Somebody who I always will look at his new film with interest, whether or not I think it entirely works, is M. Night Shyamalan, and he brought out a film this year which I really enjoyed called Trap, which is it's got a great idea. I mean, he is in some ways a filmmaker of gimmicks. In this case, he's got a great gimmick, I thought, which is that it's about a rock concert, which is actually the trap of the title, where it's been designed to lure in a serial killer. And Josh Hartnett is the main character, who has taken his daughter to the concert. But this is not a spoiler because it's revealed in the first 5 minutes. He is also the serial killer. And what's unusual about this is that he is also genuinely this kind of caring, responsible father. There's one side where he's that, the other side where he's the serial killer. In some weird way, these can just coexist. They don't even really kind of undercut each other. That's kind of something which I think probably only M. Night Shyamalan would have thought of to present in quite this way. There is like a psychological explanation for who he is, but on another level, it's sort of no, it's not realistic psychology. It's a kind of something much more abstract than that. This movie, like lots of things Night Shyamalan does, it kind of tries out like six different endings. By the time you get to the end, it's become something different anyway from what you thought it was.
Yeah.
But he's an original. He's weird. I mean, he's like the things he does, you just wonder how his brain works. So I do a lot of the time.
Yes.
Uh, Film called Matt and Mara, which played at the Melbourne International Film Festival by a Canadian director, Kathik Radvonsky. He's a guy who's made a few films, but he's not super well known. This is something you could call a romantic comedy of kind of a low key, relatively realistic kind. It also has something to do with the films of Eric Romer, the great French New Wave director, who made a lot of films that you could very loosely call romantic comedies. If you look at the very end of this film closely, the last shot, you don't actually have to look that closely. The last shot is a bookshelf, and there's a bunch of books on it, and one is a book about Eric Romer. But if you've been paying attention, then it is kind of a similar kind of film. This is also a film about infidelity, about a character who's who's married and is tempted to stray. It is ultimately treated in quite a different way from Iris and the Men in terms of the attitude to that, but it takes a while to play out. And it's quite astute about it's set in the world of literature, of people who are like creative writing teachers and who have published books and so on. And it's quite astute, I think, about just a certain type of person who, even if you're not in that world, you might recognize one way or another. Okay, so top 10 now.
Okay.
Another French film. There's a few more coming. One that surprised me quite a lot. Film called. It's got several titles. It's called La Passion d'un homme bouffon, or The Passion of d'un homme bouffon, or The Taste of Things. Maybe there's another title too. It's by the Vietnamese director Tran Anh Hung, who has long been based in France. And it's a film that surprised me mainly because films that are in large part about the preparation of sumptuous meals are among my least favourite genres. It's not something that does anything for me at all. But this film, despite being squarely in that genre and the first 40 minutes or so being dedicated basically to the preparation of a sumptuous meal, worked for me all the same. And there's a couple of things. One is that it's really a love story of sorts, of a very particular kind, about people whose connection ultimately, it is a kind of love, but it's not a personal relationship so much as a professional one. And it's these characters played by Juliette Binoche and Benoit Magimel, who is her ex in real life. And then also it is very beautifully staged, choreographed. Everything has, in terms of like how the shots are going to work. These very long takes, sometimes with characters moving like across like a large stretch of space, weaving in and out between different obstacles and so forth. Everything is plotted out very, very beautifully, and that in itself is a pleasure for me.
Yeah.
Then another, no, not another French film yet. A pretty different kind of film, actually. Do not expect too much from The End of the World. From the Romanian satirist, I guess, Radu Jude, who did the well-known or notorious Bad Luck Banging, and that kind of got particular attention because it includes hardcore porn. This one doesn't include hardcore porn, but it includes pretty much everything else you could think of. So it's in some ways he's doing satire in a very traditional sense, because he's not sort of, he doesn't have likable characters or a kind of three-act structure or any of that stuff in his films. It's more kind of grab bag of ideas, and it's always very aggressive and cynical about the state of Romania and Europe and the world, and basically it's he goes places where probably most other filmmakers might shrink from because he's willing to combine some all kind of obscure references or boring the audience or taxing our patience in different ways with, on the other hand, really kind of crass, aggressive bad taste. There's not a lot of people who will have both kind of operating at once.
Yeah.
God bless him basically for that. Then back to French movies. Somebody else I really like, who I'll always pretty much always stick up for, who hasn't made a movie in a long time, is Michel Gondry. I have a kind of maybe I don't. A lot of people like Michel Gondry for Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind, and then perhaps he dropped off people's radar a bit. But I really I really like Big Kind Red Wine, which he made with Jack Black. A little bit after, I really like a film he made called Microbe and Gasoline, which I think not a huge number of people have seen. And I really like this one. But I understand why he's kind of dropped off the map a bit, because he is kind of the king of bad vibes. Like, he does not, like, his films are whimsical, but in the end they're downers. This one very much included. It's about a filmmaker who's obviously a sort of alter ego of his, who's he has endless ideas, and a large percentage of them are terrible, and he just creates endless trouble for everybody around him. And he is the hero in Michel Gondry's eyes, but he's not designed to be easy to take, and he certainly is not easy to take. Again, it's somebody going down their own path.
Yeah.
Okay, so I do feel like, looking at this list, I feel, I've just picked all the same filmmakers I always pick. But what can I say? These are the people who I will,
Right.
every time they make a film, I'll see it and I'll probably like it. So that's just how it is.
Yeah.
So in this case, I feel every time I've done one of these lists, I picked a film by Hong Sang-soo, who's very prolific. I've picked, this year's film by Hong Sang-soo is a film called A Traveler's Needs, which is, I think, the third film he's made with Isabelle Huppert. So he's this Korean filmmaker, but he's made several films involving, like, Isabelle Huppert playing a character who comes to Korea, and this sort of culture clash that ensues. And this is another one of those. And there's something kind of charming about that in itself, because it implies that they are in some way on the same wavelength. They get each other. They have something in common, maybe in terms of a sense of humour. I have said to various people, I don't know if I've said in public or just said it to friends of mine, but it is the case, I feel, that I have never understood a Hong Sang-soo film. I mean, I like his films a great deal, but every time I watch one, I go out and go, there was something else there that I didn't quite get. The pieces do fit together on some level that is sort of, maybe I can intuitively perhaps sense, but there's still something I'm missing. Which maybe is why I try not to miss any of his films. I hope perhaps the secret will become manifest. And in the meantime, there's a great deal to enjoy.
Yeah.
Once you are a little bit on it. Okay, sort of from a relatively minimalist film to what you would have to call a maximalist film, which is Furiosa. By far my favourite blockbuster, you might say, of the year. In fact, I think the only blockbuster of the year that is worthy of the name. If there's been another one, I'm not thinking of it right now. Certainly there's nothing else that was on that scale, like big Hollywood movie, that I considered for this list. And there's a lot to be said about Furiosa, not all of which, from my angle, would necessarily be positive. Not everything in it works equally well for me, but it is just a lot of movie, and there's a lot of invention, like everything George Miller does. Like every scene, every character, every kind of gadget or big set piece, it's just as much kind of invention as he can cram in. He never does anything by halves. and but by the end, it is quite exhausting. But you've been to another world.
Yes.
Uh,
We just need to speed it up a little bit. Yep.
I think we only have I have five left, I think, or six. I will speed it up though, for
Yep.
sure. So number six then is Drive Away Dolls, which, as somebody said to me, this is Ethan Cohen's film. Ethan Cohen, has made so many films with his brother Joel Cohen. As somebody said to me, we do now know which of them is the funny one. Now they're making films separately.
Yeah.
So, Macbeth, Joel Cohen made a very serious version of Macbeth. Ethan Cohen has taken a bit longer to make his solo film, and it's he made it basically with his wife. They wrote the screenplay together, and then she's just not credited as a co-director. But from everything I gather, she was a co-director. They were going to call it Drive Away Dykes. It's a sort of sexploitation comedy or a tribute to sexploitation comedies, and it's very throwaway, and that's what's kind of captivating about it. And Margaret Qualley, who I mentioned in The Substance, is not a lot of people could have played the role that she's given to play. The same for Geraldine Viswanathan, who's the other half of this couple who are going on that, well, not a couple, but they're friends and they're going on this road trip together. And it is, in the end, a sort of story about what happens between them. But it's also a crime comedy. It has various kind of gangster intrigues. It's like a lot of Coen Brothers films, but it's much more like the early films where they were having fun than the later ones where they started to take themselves more seriously.
Yeah.
Uh,
Keep going.
okay, film called The Sparrow in the Chimney. Again, didn't play in cinemas, played at MIF. It's by the Zurcher brothers, who made a previous film called The Girl and the Spider. This one, or rather, like Ramon Zurcher is like the writer and director in this case, but his brother did work on it with him and is the producer. Sylvan Zurcher. It is an extension of the kind of thing they were up to in The Girl and the Spider. If you described it, tried to summarize the plot and said there's kind of a family gathering, all these characters were kind of at each other's throats, that would give no idea at all of the actual texture of the film, which is what it's really about. I feel they have, in some ways, invented a new kind of narrative form. It is not, in my eyes, so much about characters and story or any of that stuff as it is about how they tell the story and sort of basically pulling the story apart as they go. And also, in my eyes, they are basically comic filmmakers, but their idea of a joke takes a while to catch on to completely.
Okay.
As we're
5 minutes.
5 minutes and three films. So I think we're more or less on schedule.
Yeah.
Top three. Okay, so number three, film called All of Us Strangers. Andrew Hay came out near the start of the year. Stars Andrew Scott and Paul Mescal. Very moving film. I really like Andrew Hay. I have liked almost all of his films. It's a one again that shifts genres, and it's a supernatural romance. You could say it has a time slip element. This guy traveling back in time to meet his parents as if they were still alive, which they're not in the story. But he meets them as if it were a dream, but it's not a dream. What is striking about this is that it seems like it's moving towards not necessarily a happy ending, but an ending that would resolve things in a certain way. And then it winds up taking a left turn and becomes something less resolved, but perhaps more haunting. But anyway, I was very, very moved by especially all the performances in this. Andrew Hayes, he's very good with, he's very sensitive with actors. Another film which is difficult to place, perhaps, in terms of genre, and has one or two other things in common with All of the Strangers, but not really similar, is second favourite film of the year, Misericordia, Alain Gorod's film. Another director who just absolutely goes on his own path. You could call this a thriller, perhaps, but it's not that. It's about a guy who is from like the backwoods of France, which is where a lot of Alain Gorod's films happen, and he's coming back home to for a funeral. He has this weird relationship with his former friend. There's a lot of homoerotic tension, and then there's a really sharp left turn. But what's striking about that is that the things that are given weight in the story are not necessarily what you would expect, and the attitudes of characters are not necessarily what you would expect, and so on. You kept on your toes. Again, just a very original guy.
Yes.
And finally, favourite film of the year uh, has only played at MIF so far. Don't know if it'll make it elsewhere, but a film some of us kind of have been waiting for in a sense for a long time. Uh, Close Your Eyes by Victor Ariche, the great Spanish director who made long ago a film called The Spirit of the Beehive. That was his first feature, and it's become a classic. But he hasn't got to make a great many films since. And this film, among other things, features Anna Torrent, who was a little girl who's in Spirit of the Beehive, and now she's basically a lifetime older. So the film is, among other things, about the passage of time, and it's also a little bit about all the films that, as it turned out, Victor Ariche did not get to make. It also perhaps has something to do with a director who I know he admired, and the admiration was mutual. The late American director Monty Hellman, who made a film called Road to Nowhere, which in certain ways reminds me of this one. It's very kind of low key, this film, and that it's just nothing, doesn't raise its voice, and it takes a while before you even start to feel where it's going. But it is a journey, worth kind of just trusting that it is going somewhere. Okay, so that's what I liked basically.
Okay, what an interesting, eclectic, and far-reaching list. Terrific hearing all that, Jake. And my Zoom is just about to run out, so great timing. So we've been speaking to Jake Wilson, film reviewer at The Age and the Sydney Morning Herald, with his worst, but certainly his best films of 2024. Jake, as always, great to talk to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Peter. It's been a pleasure.
Okay, all the best. Bye bye.
Bye bye.